Hello, welcome to another video of code snippet. So this video is basically continuation of last video where we are looking into unit testing inside Spring Boot. So in the last video we have looked into some of the basic stuff. Now in this video we are going to jump into bit of advanced stuff, and major thing we are going to look into is unit testing lifecycle. So this is going to be a fun video, so sit back, relax and enjoy the show. So let's get started with the agenda first. So this was the agenda of last video. So we have seen the introduction of unit testing. Then we have seen why unit testing is important. Then we have seen how to set up unit test inside your Spring Boot application, and we have implemented a unit test by using JUnit 5 and Mockito, right? So if you haven't seen this video, just go ahead and check that first, as this is going to be part 2 of that video. So this is the agenda of this particular video. So basically unit testing in Spring Boot part 2, right? First we are going to start with unit test lifecycle, right? Once we understand that there are various annotations that comes into picture inside this lifecycle, so those annotations we are going to look into. After that we are going to look into do nothing from Mockitos, which is again a very important method when you want to mock void function calls inside your test, so that you can achieve by using do nothing. After that we will see how we can test private methods, right? And after that we will see how we can test exceptions inside your test cases, right? So this is basically the overall agenda of this particular video. Right, so let's get started with test lifecycle first. So let me jump to canvas over here. So this is basically the potential lifecycle of your test. In any Java application, overall unit test will have this particular lifecycle. So let's go through it one by one, right? So this is the first stage inside your lifecycle, right? So first what we do is, let's say there is a test class, right? So before execution of all the tests inside your test class, let's say we have to do some kind of setup, right? So that particular setup we can do by using before all method, right? So the method which is annotated with @before all will be executed first inside your test class. So what we will do, let me just go back over here. So this is basically the test that we have added in the last video, right? So this is basically the same test. Now if I execute this particular test, then you will see that this particular test is running, the same test that we have added in the last video, right? Now let's add a method, right? So let's say public void init, right? For now I'll just add a simple print statement over here. So this is a before all method, let's say, but we haven't converted this method to before all yet. How we are going to convert? By using @before all annotation, right? Let me go back again and let me just annotate it with before all. There we go. So the before all method should be static method. So I have converted it to static again. Now, as we are seeing that this is a class level setup, that means this particular function should be executed before all the tests inside your test class. And this method will only be invoked once, right? Only once. Now let me just run this particular test again. Let's see what happens. Now do you see this? Now before all is printed. Now I'm just running this particular test, right? I'm not running everything. Still the before all is being executed, right? That means this before all is for class level setup, will be executed only once and will be executed before all the tests inside your application, right? So I have added this particular dummy test over here. So let's run all the tests now, right? So if I run all the tests, let's see what happens. So as you can see, both the tests are running, but before all is printed only once, right? So now what is the purpose of this before all? Why they have given this particular method? So let's say you want to do some kind of DB connections. So let's say you are playing with database as well, mock databases. Then you can handle something like that over here, JDBC connections and everything. Or let's say there are some kind of objects which are shared among many tests inside your application, right? So that particular object you can create over here, right? So this is basically class level setup. Let's go back over here. So that is for class level setup. So before all we have seen. Next is before each. So before each is basically set up for each of your tests, right? So as our before all was getting executed only once, before each will be executed before each test inside your test class, right? So for example, let's go back over here and let me add one more method, right? What I will do, I'll just copy this and I will just add one more method. Let's say init each test, right? And what I will do, I will just add before each annotation now. So I have added before each annotation, and again this method should not be static. Before all should be static as it is going to be executed only once and will be bound to this particular test. But before each will not be static, right? I've changed the print statement to before each, right? Now let's run all the tests, right? Let me run all the tests. Now before all is printed once, but how many times before each is printed? It is printed 2 times. That means before each test, before each is being called. Now what is the purpose, right? What is the purpose? What is the purpose of before each, right? So before each is basically used for preparing test surroundings, right? So there might be some kind of dynamic objects inside your test which may be different for each test, right? So you can tweak the data before each the test and you can run this particular method before each test and prepare that kind of data setup, right? So that is something which we can achieve from here, right? So that is basically before each. Now once these two methods are invoked, after that the execution of test will be start. In your test class, if you have before all, that will be executed once. After that, if your test class have before each, then that will be executed before running this particular test. After that, this test will be invoked, right? And after that, we have after each and after all, which are pretty similar to before each and before all, but it is just a negative case. So in these two, you are doing setup. Now here you will do cleanup. After each will be called after the execution of each test, and after all will be called at the end of all the tests. Once all the tests are executed, this guy will be called, right? So let's quickly add some methods and let's see how that is being invoked. What I will do, I'll add a couple of methods, right? So I have added a couple of methods over here. First is cleanup, which is after each, and second is after all, which is for cleaning up the class level data, right? So I've named it as a destroy. Now let's run all the tests. Let me go over here and trigger all the tests over here. Let's see what happens. So as you can see, we have before all, then we have before each, right? After that, the test will run, and then we have after method, right? We have before each 2 times. After that, we have after each 2 times, and we have after all once, right? That means before each and after each are being called 2 times for each test, and before all and after all are being called once for this particular test class. Again, the question arises, what is the purpose, right? So after each can be used to reset few values, right? So let's say you have some variables, you want to reset it after the execution of each test, then that is something which we can achieve by using after each. Then you have after all, you want to destroy DB connections that you have started inside this particular before all, that is something you can achieve over here inside after all, right? So that is basically the purpose of these 4 annotations, right? So that is basically the test life cycle that we have, right? So before all, before each, test, then after each and after all. That's how your test life cycle looks like. Let's go back over here, and we have seen the test life cycle and we have seen all these annotations as well, right? So let's proceed and look into mocking void methods using do nothing, right? So this is again important thing. So let's jump into our code. So here basically in this test, so if I go to add product, then we are mocking this save, right? So if I go back, then we are mocking this save by using when. So when product repository.save is called, then return product, right? So we are looking into then return here, right? Because the save method returns us something, right? It will return us something. There is a return type, right? But let's say there is certain method where there is no return type. For example, let's go back over here and let's say there should be a method like delete by ID. So there we go. We have this delete by ID. If I go inside, then this is void method. Now you cannot return anything while testing this, right? So let's do one thing. Let's add a test for delete product, right? Let's go back over here in our test class and let's add a new test. Perhaps I will convert this particular test only. Let's say delete product should delete product successfully. Now what I will do over here, first of all, we will call product service dot delete product, right? And let's say product ID is 1, right? And what we can assert over here now, what we can assert? We can assert that this particular product repository dot delete by ID is at least called once, right? Now how we can do that? How we can achieve this? Here we can use something called as verify. So verify is a method which comes from Mockito, which takes basically 2 arguments. So if I go inside it, we'll take 2 arguments, that what is called, and there is a verification mode. We want to check if product repository is called. Now what is the second parameter? Verification mode, right? Now let's say I want to check if product repository dot delete by ID is called once, right? So what I will do, I will add a verification mode as times, right? How many times, right? How many times is again a verification mode. So if you look into it, it will return the verification mode object, which is required by this particular verify, right? And still it is not completed. Product repository dot which method we want to check, right? That we will define over here, that I want to check delete by id with parameter 1, right? What I will check, that product repository dot delete by id is called once, right? So that is basically the verification. Now I'll just remove it, since we have static import over here. In the top we have static import, so that is not needed. So verify basically comes from Mockito, right? So that is again one more thing that we have learned, Mockito.verify, right? Now let's proceed, right? Now what to do? What to do when this particular statement will be encountered now, right? Last time what we did when there were this particular statement, we used something like Mockito.when, right? Here we use Mockito.when. When repository.save is called with this particular product, then return this particular product, right? So that is something we did. But now what we can do over here is, since this guy is returning nothing, this guy is returning void, what we can do, we can make use of do nothing. Do nothing when product repository dot delete by id is called with argument 1, right? So that is how you read it. Do nothing when product repository dot delete by id is called by id 1, right? So what it will do, it will basically do nothing, right, as the name suggests. And we can just verify if product repository dot delete by id is called once inside that particular function. Now let's run this test. If I run this test now, then it is basically passing, right? No problem, everything is working fine, right? That is basically how you can use do nothing, right? So do nothing and verify are the two things we have seen in this particular test, right? Do nothing, and I will just add verify as well, right? Mockito.verify. So this also we have seen, right? So let's proceed and let's see how we can test private methods now, right? So let's go back over here, and here if you see we have one private method, right? Now let's first use this method at least, right? So I will go over here, I will just make use of this method inside our add product. Just add it here, that validate product name. Let's say I want to validate the product name inside this particular product, which is incoming one. And what I will do, I will do product dot get name. I will just pass over here, and that will basically just validate, right? I will just catch the output over here in a variable, let's say validation, right? Validation perhaps, right? So validation. Now if validation is true, right, if let's say validation is true, then only I want to save the product, right? If the validation is false, I'll just throw exception. So in the else part, I'm just throwing an exception that this is the invalid name of this particular product, right? Now let's go back to our test. Now if I execute this, then it should work fine. But what if I remove this name now? What if I remove this name? Oh, it started into debug mode. Now since it started into debug mode, let's debug. So first it is going into before all, right? Now let's see where it is going into. It came into add product. Now the validation will be false. It will throw a exception, right? And your test will fail, right? Your test will fail basically. So basically the point over here is that this particular private method will come in the flow of any public method or not. It will, right? It will definitely come, because if it is not coming, that means it is not used, right? If it is unused, then what is the use of it? Remove it, right? Now how to test the private methods? The private method will come into the flow of public method, right? And you should write the test for this particular public method now, right? And you should convert both the scenarios, both the cases inside this particular guy should return true and false both. So if I add the book name over here, this is a positive case already, right? But we should add a negative case as well, right? We should add a negative case as well. So that we will add, right? But before that, let's say there is some crazy interviewer like me, and even if you given this particular answer that we can test, I want the test to be separate, right? I want the test of this particular private method to be separate, right? How we can do that? How we can call this particular method in the first place as it is private? We cannot call this method right from here. We cannot call it directly. We can only call through public method, but our interviewer is not happy. Then what we can do? So that is when one more option comes into picture, that is Java reflections, right? So So let's see how we can achieve that by using Java reflections. Let me just add a new test over here. Let's say test private method, validate product name. So even if you have validate product name test, it should be fine. But for our reference, I'm just giving this particular name over here, that we are testing the private methods over here. What we can do over here is we can get that particular method from that class first. So we cannot call it directly by using object or mocks. We need to get that first. We can do that by using reflections. How to do? We can do product service dot class. So we have got a class now. After that, we can use the function get declared methods. Get declared method function is there, where we can pass the method name, right? We can pass the method name. What is the method name we want? We want this particular method. So I'll just give the name over here, and it needs two parameters. First is name and second is parameter type. Let's say parameter type is string. Basically, I'm passing string. So parameter type is string. So this is basically string, right? So what I'll do, I'll just close this, and this guy is crying because we need to handle the exception basically, right? So if the method is not present, then it will throw no such method exception. So that is something we need to handle. Now what we will do, we'll just get it in a variable, right? So I'm just getting that in a variable, right? So that is basically the method. So that is how you can just get that particular method. And this method basically comes from your reflect, Java lang reflect, which is kind of a reflections that we have, right? And once you have that, what you can do, you can do this particular method dot invoke, right? Invoke with what parameter you want to invoke it now. Now let's see what parameter invoke needs, right? So let's go into it. So it needs two objects basically. So the first object is the product service that we have, right? Product service, basically the object, and the second is the name, right? So arguments, basically the arguments that this particular method wants, right? Now this guy also is crying. What it is saying, again it will throw another exception. So add it in method signature, whatever you want, right? Just add it. It added. Now this will return us something, right? This will return us something. So let's catch that in a variable. Let's convert it to Boolean, and let's just typecast it, right? Cast expression to Boolean. So now we have a book, which is kind of a Boolean object, right? Now the final step is just assert, right? So assert true and pass book to it. So I'll just run this. Let's check. Now it failed. It failed, saying that product service test cannot access the member of product service, right? So we have done everything and we are at the same place, right? That this guy is not able to access that guy, right? What we can do over here is we can just make it accessible by using set accessible true. This is basically the functionality provided by your Java reflection. You can just make it accessible, right, for testing purpose, right? And now if I run this, now this is working fine, right? So this is a positive case. Let's add a negative case as well. I'll just paste it again, and I will just say if name is invalid, right? Now I'll just pass empty name, invalid spelling, let me correct, and I will just pass empty name, and in this case it should be false, right? So in this case what I will do assert false, right? And if I run this now, then it should again run fine, right? So that is how you can test private methods inside your test, right? So this is basically one way by which you can test it. Let's go back. So testing private methods we have seen. Now the final point that we are going to look into this video is testing exceptional scenarios. Now just while looking into this, we have created one exceptional scenario, right? So if I remove this and run this particular test, then we are getting this exception, right? We are throwing the exception, basically runtime exception, right? Now let's add another test in order to handle that. Now what I will do, let me just copy this particular test and let me just paste it over here. Change the name to add product should throw exception for invalid product name, right? So that is basically we want to assert now. Now here what I will do, I'll just remove this book name, right? And now what I will do, now this is again positive, right? So let me just remove everything over here, and this is also is not needed because it won't even go inside that particular case, because if validation is false, then it will right away throw the exception, right? What we need to do over here is now we can make use of assert throws, right? Now assert throws takes two argument, right? Expected type and second is executable, right? So first is expected type. So what we want runtime exception, right? Because this guy is throwing runtime exception, right? So we want to add a runtime exception over here. So what I will do, I'll just add a runtime exception dot class, right? And the second parameter is executable. That means what is being executed. That means on what execution you want to check if runtime exception is called. What we want to execute? We want to execute add a product method, right? Add a product method we want to execute. Now executable, how do we add? We add kind of a lambda expression over here, right? So this is basically the syntax of lambda expression. Just paste this particular thing over here. That means on the execution of product service dot add product, I want to check if runtime exception is thrown, right? If that is thrown, then this particular test will pass, right? So if I run this, then the test should pass. But if I pass, let's say anything over here, then it should fail, because in that case, this guy won't throw any exception, right? So in that case, your test is basically failing, right? Let me just remove this and let me just rerun this, so it should pass, right? We can catch the return of this in a variable as well. And we can also validate if the message provided by this guy is the one which we are expecting, right? So what we can do over here is we can make use of assert equals, right? What is expected? We are expecting this particular string over here. Let me go and copy this string and paste it over here. And the second parameter is this runtime exception dot get message, right? So this again should be similar, right? So if I run this again, then it should pass. If this is different, some other exception is coming with other message, then this case will fail, right? Because any other exception can come, right? We want to assert that only this particular exception should be thrown if this book name is missing, right? And we can also check if this product repository dot save is not called, right? So we can use same approach. So same thing, we can just go over here and add it here, right? So product repository dot save is called, let's say 0 times, right? 0 times, right? Now save needs a parameter, right? Save needs a parameter which is entity, right? And whatever save is going to get, by going to add product, it will get the object of product, right? So we can just pass a product over here, right? And that should just work fine. So if I run this, then it will again pass, right? But let's say you don't have product at this moment, then you can again use of mockito.any, right? So there is a any method provided by Mockito. That means let any product be there for any object of product class. Check if product repository.save is called, right? That is also you can use, right? So any is again a useful method which you can use. Now this verification mode also can be converted to never, right? So never means it is never called, right? So instead of saying 0 times, you can just make use of never function. Again, it will return same output, right? Now, as you can see over here, we have this product defined over here, and we also have same product defined over here. What we can do over here is we can extract this guy. Let me just cut it, add it in our before all. And what I will do, I'll just declare a global product over here, right? So that it is accessible, right? So initially, let's say it is null, right? But in before it will be initialized. Now, as this particular before all is static, we need to make this guy static as well, right? After that only we can access it, right? Now, let's say if I run this, then this test should work fine now, right? But if I run this particular test, it will fail, right? Because our product is basically fine, right? Our product is basically fine and the product name is present inside this particular product, right? Now, what we can do over here is we can change the product dot set name to empty name, right? So once you do that and run this test, then this will basically run fine, right? So that is basically how you can initialize the data inside your init, right? Same thing you can do inside before each as well, right? So let's say each time you need to frame a new object, right? New object of product, right? With different parameters. Each test is modifying the parameters, right? And each test may need separate parameters, for example this. Then you can do that in before each as well, right? So that is basically the use case of using before all and before each, right? So that's we have seen this particular exceptional scenario as well, how to test that also we have seen. So testing exceptional scenarios as well is completed. So that is basically the end of it. So we have learned many things inside this video. So I hope by now you have understanding of many advanced things inside unit testing. For example, test lifecycle, all these annotations, how we can make use of do nothing and verify, how we can test your private methods by using reflections, by using your public methods, right? And we have also seen the exception scenarios, how to check if the exception is thrown or not, right? So many things we have learned. So if you like the video, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to Code Snippet. Share this video with your friends so that they are also aware of advanced stuff inside unit testing. That's it for this video. See you in the next video.